Okay. That's where I'm going to get in some trouble. So, obviously, it's, do you believe in the restored gospel, the tenets of the restored gospel as taught by the LDS Church? Do you believe the Book of Mormon is true? Do you believe Joseph Smith was a prophet? And do you believe Russell Nelson is a prophet? Do you abstain from alcohol, tea, and coffee? Do you follow the law of chastity? And, are there any crimes or something you've committed? I think those are generally the questions. And, but this is my approach that gets me to some trouble. But I didn't really stop saying Mormon when the name switch happened.
We noticed Midnight Mormons. Oh, we noticed.
Yeah. Well, because I identify as Mormon before LDS, so, because there are a number of different denominations in the Restoration. And it's weird how someone can be Protestant, but they can be Methodist, they could be Baptist, they could be Presbyterian. There's a number of different ways you can be Protestant, but they're still Protestant first before they're of those denominations. I believe in the Book of Mormon, but tomorrow if news broke that Jeffrey R. Holland was like beating Yorkies in his basement or something, and like just a massive scandal, just institutional collapsing, like nobody could trust the brethren, the whole church office building is gone haywire and they're evil, 15 stake presidents get arrested for money, just whatever, I would still be Mormon, because my belief in the Book of Mormon is rooted outside of the LDS Church. The first vision happened before the church was established. The Book of Mormon was translated before the church was established. Even the priesthood restoration happened before the church was established. I don't know why we think being LDS has to contain everything Mormon, and if you stop being LDS, then the whole restoration is thrown out. There's a ton of different perspectives of Mormon history. There's a ton of different takes on what some of these concepts mean, and even Joseph Smith taught a lot of things that we don't really teach or express today. And we were talking about this last night, how generally most people in the ex-Mormon media space really dislike Brigham Young. They really dislike Brigham Young, but they believe Brigham Young's version of Mormon history. And even though they're ex-Mormon, they still give credence to his version of history without looking at other versions of Mormon history that may come from the Bickertonites, the Strangites, even Community of Christ. There are so many other ways to be Mormon. So I have to look at this exhaustively and say, okay, I am Mormon first. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but if something happens to the church, I'm still going to be Mormon. And I don't believe that you have to have a black and white, a Mormon must be XYZ or else he's not Mormon. That's just not how spirituality works. And trying to dictate and gerrymander people's soul that way, it's just an ego stroke, right? Like, you can be Mormon and you can believe in space aliens. You can be Mormon and you can believe in multiple mortal probations. You can be Mormon and you can kind of not even believe in anything, but you just go to church and fulfill your calling. There isn't one way to actually be Mormon. That's why the church doesn't own the copyrights to the word Mormon. So Mormon first, LDS second.
Mm.
So yeah, and that's what puts me in this interesting position where I'm sometimes on my own little island here, because sometimes LDS people don't understand me and ex-LDS people don't understand me, and I'm like, I'm sitting here in limbo. I literally don't know who vibes into here, and part of that's I'm really into Christ consciousness and all that stuff, and I think the Book of Mormon is a huge, big Christ consciousness book. I think the Restoration is extremely esoteric and has a lot of elements of non-dualism. I think we have barely begun to understand what Joseph Smith was really putting out there. I don't even think he fully understood the full message of what he was channeling and putting out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so many questions popping off my head. Because that's where I kind of wanted to start in terms of people are going to be obviously like frustrated with you and confused with you. Where my brain goes to is so much of me, my audience, the way that we were raised in this type of more like McConkie Mormonism, Mormon doctrine, things coming down from the pulpit. These are the leaders that you respect and you adhere to their authority.
Listen to the words I have verily set forth. Yeah, that's my McConkie.
And so by one account, it's like we were taught this very straightforward way to be in line with the Spirit of God, and the Spirit will be taken from us if we are not following the tenets that are revealed by the first presidency. We can't be with our family together if we divert from that path and all of those things. So that, to most of us, is what Mormonism is. It is not something that has a little bit more of do your own path. And most people would not ever describe themselves, I would guess, that are in the church in a similar way as you just did, or anyone who's left the church, that was their experience with Mormonism. And so, for one, I can feel a lot of the frustration from the ex-Mormons listening right now, who have been not given that kind of allowance, privilege, to be able to have such an expansive view of doctrine and ideas and adherence to prophets without feeling like their internal soul is going to be, up for Satan's taking. So I feel a lot of ideas about frustration that, on one account, you can go on Jubilee, you can say Mormonism is true in kind of a way that feels maybe like moving the goalpost or speaking out of both sides of your mouth, where you're upholding these ideas about why Mormonism is good and it is true. But most people, what you just described, that's not Mormonism to them. You know where I'm going with that? So,
well, yeah, I mean, it very well may not be. Like, to be fair, on Jubilee, I tried to describe some of this stuff, but it didn't make it into the cut. But I was also honest in my initial interviews on there as well. They said, "Hey, we've seen you around. You're a Mormon," and they actually specifically asked. Actually, with Cardin in the room, they called me and they said, "How do you feel? Do we need to say LDS or Mormon?" And then Cardin said, "LDS." And I said, "Well, I would say identify as Mormon first and LDS second." So I was honest with it. They just, I'm not the editor or the producer, but yeah, well, just in the same way that, like, a guy born in Burley, Idaho, to an LDS family in 1971 was raised totally different in the church than someone born in, St. George in 2005, right? Both are different Mormon perspectives. But at some point, you just have to say, look, people are going to interpret spirituality different. And this idea that because someone interprets and talks about their spirituality differently in a way that doesn't reflect how I was raised, it doesn't mean that person is disingenuous or wrong. It means that there's just different paths to walk in life. I don't have to reflect anybody but me. And, I don't know why, because someone wants to go and talk about their belief in the Book of Mormon, they have to, if their story doesn't reflect someone else's or doesn't reflect someone else's trauma, well, I mean, good luck, like, good luck being a human. No one has the same story. I may not represent, someone who has left the church and was taught, my eternal soul's at risk. My family can't be together forever. But if I hear something like that, I have to ask, what does it mean that your family can be together forever? What does that even mean? Does the church even know what that means? Does the church even know what the celestial kingdom looks like? We have these concepts which bring us further than a lot of mainstream Christianity. But then when you get there, you have to ask, what do these things actually mean? What actually is the priesthood? Is our priesthood blessings a form of manifestation? Is it literal magic? Is it some Enochian chant? Like, what is it? We don't actually know. And so I examine those things and I say, I think that means we have to come to our own conclusions. We should talk about those conclusions. But just because my conclusions may be different than, the conclusion that someone else feels like they were force-fed, well, that's just kind of life. It's not really a good answer,
What it comes down to me, is I hear you kind of removing the authority that the church's proposition puts forward. To me, the church's proposition is the one true restored church that Joseph Smith was asking questions about what church he should join. God said all the rest of them are an abomination, and you need to restore the one true church and restore these keys. And through these ordinances, these are the only, practices and ordinances that will give you the information and the teachings that will, seal your family back together and the right way to live to return to your Heavenly Father again. And restoring that through Joseph Smith, that is the proposition in resistance to so much of the free will and fancy free other ideas that people put out. You know what I mean?
Kind of. So sort of. So I would say when I read the writings of Joseph Smith seems a lot more liberal in his approach to spirituality and salvation than the prophets afterward. Joseph Smith made clear that the church and the kingdom of God were separate things. He has a whole sermon about how the church and the kingdom of God are not the same thing. And even look at the Book of Mormon. At the end of the Book of Mormon, there's no church. The church is destroyed. Moroni, it's one guy carrying the record, and all he has is his divine connection to God.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me stop you for a second. So how does that converge then with the idea that, once God restored the church, that he will never, the way that prophets say that God will never let the church be led astray again?
Well, Joseph Smith didn't say that. Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball said that. I haven't found anywhere Joseph Smith just straight up said, I will never allow the church to, or God would never allow that to happen. He warned a lot about how the saints could fall. Doctrine and Covenants is full of Jesus saying, you're only my people and if you mess up, you're no longer my people. So that, again, that's a tradition in LDS history, to say that. But
again, the logic to me, though, is that Joseph Smith is saying, I'm restoring this church. We're bringing back something from from the great apostasy. We're bringing back prophets, and that with these keys that are now going from me, Joseph Smith, into the next hands of the next prophets, to carry forth this dispensation until Christ comes again. That's more the proposition than I understand. And it sounds like you're saying that it's...
Well, I'm saying he was restoring the gospel, but he also delineated that the kingdom of God and the church were not the same thing. And he often spoke about how the church could be destroyed. So we have the narrative of Mormonism from the manuals, and then we react to the manuals and assume that the teachings of the manuals or the correlated curriculum is exactly what Joseph Smith had in mind. But that can't be so. There's no way an institution that's deliberating on information and printing it out for a way that's easy for everyone to stomach is going to exhaustively reflect the mind of a 19th century mystic who we're still trying to figure out to this day, So, yeah, I mean, the church, that flavor of Mormon history, it you can debate it. But if you still come at the end of, I think the Book of Mormon is real. I think this happened. I think there is wisdom and deep philosophy in this. I think it's something that can change your spirit and change society as a whole. I think this is something that should be honored as a religious text, along with, the Bhagavad Gita, along with the Old Testament, along with the New Testament, along with the Zend-Avesta. It's something for the soul. Then I think that's totally fine. But I don't believe that Joseph Smith at all was making himself out to be like the number one guy. He had too much self-deprecation. He all the time spoke about how, he fell very short, and even the scriptures he revelated from the Lord chastised him a lot. So is the narrative Joseph Smith came and said the church will never fall away? Or is that something that kind of came from folksy talk after Joseph died? That's the real question for me, because a lot of the things we attribute to Joseph saying, when I go and look, I don't find him saying those things. You find Brigham Young sing a lot. You find Heber C. Kimball, John Taylor. These guys sing a lot. But I'm talking OG Joseph Smith, And when I look at what Joseph taught, you do find a lot of room. I mean, he said, I've never heard of a man being damned for believing too much, just for believing too little. He talked about how God was extremely liberal when it comes to salvation. He even, if you look at his account with the Delaware tribe, with the Native Americans, and they're talking about the Great Spirit, he honored what they believed, just like what's written in the Book of Mormon, and just like what Paul does in the New Testament. He says, look, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Great Spirit, but he tells the Delaware tribe, the Great Spirit is true. So you find a lot in his life that allows there to be a perspective of more expansive spirituality. I mean, ultimately, we believe that everyone can be saved, and we believe that Jesus is, we're all the children of Heavenly Father. I mean, that's a pretty hardcore thing to say in the 19th century, and most people don't agree with that. So, yeah, I differ from a lot of people there, because I don't necessarily think that just because an institution says jump, we have to say how high, or I don't want to jump that high, when there's a completely different way we can examine it. And I think as human beings, we owe that to ourselves. We're allowed to read the Book of Mormon with our own spiritual lens and say, what is this actually saying? Are some of these lessons different than what, my neighbors and my bishop think? And that's up to you to decide to be brave enough to tackle that on and accept a message or expand upon a message that maybe other people aren't getting. If you don't want to do that, that's totally fine. But it doesn't mean that everybody has to be just, follow the manual.
Mm-hmm. So to summarize, what I'm kind of getting, a lot of different things bounce around my head. But for one, it feels to me like, well, yes, I, as an ex-Mormon who you could guess the things that I had to say about Joseph Smith. I could see certain small instances of him adding some good spiritual ideas here and there, but I feel like those are very few and far between, as opposed to a lot of the things that he instituted that were behind men of his time in terms of different racist ideas, and ideas about women and polygamy. And you can think of ways that, DNC was instituted, and the ways that he was talking on behalf of God. And so what I have a problem with is, yes, you can say like I can say he had some good ideas, but the Mormon lens is to put his authority as, next to Jesus Christ. The way that he also did talk about himself was that he also said stuff like, I've done more for man, like compared to Jesus Christ, that quote from Joseph Smith where he said, I've done more to save the souls of Jesus than Jesus Christ, because at least my followers haven't left me yet. And there's other quotes from him saying, one of my favorites that's actually in Hannah Stoddard's book, which I would love to talk to you about your opinions about that faction of Mormonism that has the traditionalist faction, the quotes in their book pointing to things like, you will not be able to get to heaven, Joseph Smith says, unless you pass through Joseph Smith, that he has to okay your entrance into heaven, or that Joseph Smith said that before you joined the church, you stood on neutral ground and you had the option to choose God or Satan before you. And since you joined the church and you chose God, now if you ever leave it, you only do so by the enticings of Satan. So what I have an issue with is it's not like, the smaller things that I'm like, yeah, he probably had some good ideas that added to the views around at the time. It's the 95% of the very authoritative takes.
Now, are those takes all from the pen of Joseph Smith? Because one of the problems I'm finding when I go and investigate, actually, I'll give an example here. One of the justifications for the priesthood ban was it's in Deseret, or it might have been Utah. I think it's actually still Deseret. And Brigham Young at conference starts talking about slavery. And he quotes scripture by saying, don't you know that all of, the Lord marked Cain with black skin, and all of the children of Adam will receive the priesthood before Cain does. He was quoting a scripture, but that scripture doesn't exist. It's not in the Bible. It's not in the Book of Mormon. It's not anywhere. But he quotes a scripture that doesn't exist, and everyone around just sort of believes. It's in 2024. If someone quotes a scripture, Carol, you can look it up on Gospel Library immediately. And in 1855, you can't do that. Half people are still kind of illiterate. So it's not a thing to go fact check your preacher in the way it is now. But for then generations, people actually believed that there was a legitimate scripture in the Bible that talked about black skin in that way, because it's something that Brigham Young kind of just made up or was paraphrasing, or who knows what he was doing. But what that shows to me is that someone can incorrectly recollect history or facts and present them as truth, and people will believe it, and then it becomes standard correlated history until 100 years later, where we have the technology to realize that something's wrong there. So the problem with some of these quotes about Joseph Smith, or things Joseph Smith said, is they're not coming from Joseph. They come 30 years after he's dead. A lot, like the vast majority of the most controversial things he's saying, you don't find them in lectures on faith. You don't find them in his writings. Oftentimes you find the exact opposite ideas. So, why is something that, George D. Watt remembers 10 years after Joseph's dead, that seems to go along with a doctrinal innovation by Brigham Young that seems to contradict what Joseph himself wrote. Why am I believing that over what Joseph himself said and wrote? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the problems where people like me have, where people are saying, well, look at this horrible thing Joseph said. And I'm like, okay, when was it first recorded? 1875? He's been dead for a while. Is there anything that traces to him saying this in any of his own writings early on, or anything directly from his mouth to one of his scribes? No. So to me, this is suspect. So I take that approach, because why would I believe what someone wrote that someone else said 20 years after they're dead, as opposed to what they're deliberately writing when they're alive? Joseph Smith ran for president of the United States as an emancipationist. Pretty amazing thing to do, especially when he did it, but his legacy gets painted as, oh, well, he was this, massive bigot. Well, let's have a real conversation about it. And let's look at what Joseph himself was saying. And a lot of it's just absolutely amazing, beautiful stuff. So I don't know. I mean, I don't trust people who, in hive mind, who have a narrative and a goal to paint someone with their school of thought and believe a later attribution of something that reflects their school of thought that may contradict the own words of the person they're talking about. Mm-hmm. I think it's totally fair to say, I'm going to trust Joseph's writings only. I think it's totally fair to do that. There are so many Protestants who belong. I've got a friend. He's a big time Protestant. He only believes in the Gospels and the epistles written that weren't Paul. He rejects everything Paul writes because he doesn't think Paul was a legitimate apostle. He thinks Paul's experience on the road to Damascus is a little bit suspect. So he takes the words of Peter and James over Paul. This guy's Protestant. This guy is a member of the Southern Baptist Church. He loves the Lord. He's on the records. He serves it in his church duties. But he, as a sentient being with a soul and a brain, is absolutely allowed to say, I think we're wrong about some of this history here, and I'm not going to accept or pretend to believe in something I think is inaccurate. And I think every single human being has the right to do that. And I don't know why we hold people hostage and say, no, you've got to accept this other version, even if that version seems a little bit suspect, I mean, and not to derail, but, we've had so much of that. That's what gave birth right now to this polygamy, I don't want to call it polygamy denial because they don't like that. But, this polygamy questioning movement, with the Rob Fotheringhams and the Jacob Isbells and, the most, 132 problems. Those people are freaking wrecking it on YouTube. They're getting so many views, and they're saying, we're doubting the narrative of polygamy. We don't think Joseph was a polygamist. And now there's a legitimate debate on that. That's a good thing, in my opinion. if something seems off in history, you shouldn't just have two versions to go with. Manual mainstream Mormonism as taught by the institution, and this is exactly how the history is, and there's nothing else to learn, or, Mormon Stories, Nuance Ho, Mormon Discussions Inc. version of history. Like, that's insane to me that there's only two versions I'm allowed to pick from. No, you should make your own conclusions.
Okay. So, so many different things I'm thinking about. For one, I don't like that argument. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I think it is very convenient, in my honest, straightforward, I think it's very convenient to be part of a religious idea and a group and an identity. And then when people, for instance, who are very harmed by the actual teachings and instituted policies from those words and those teachings, those make ideas, and those ideas are put forward and they're carried generation to generation, and people are really harmed by them. And my heart is in the sex Mormon space because people are very harmed by the authority that the LDS Church speaks with and has carried on these teachings one to another. And so it's not just saying like ex-Mormons or, people who are being more antagonistic are saying like Joseph Smith taught this, and you're like, well, where's that written? Whatever. I think it's the way that the church has operated for so long. It's like, I don't really need to even look for specific quotes, even though I do think that's kind of a convenient sidestep from where you're at. And so that's my bold opinion, that I think it's a convenient sidestep to say, well, where is that written? When that matters, but also the actual policies and attitudes overarching from Mormonism's beginning to now are instituted and actual things that have happened because of those teachings. And so, like, for instance, it's kind of downplaying Joseph Smith's ideas of himself and his role and his authority. But, my argument back to that would be like, did he not say that Emma would be destroyed if she didn't get on board with polygamy in DNC? Like, did Joseph Smith not tell people to invest in his bank, that people had these ideas about the authority that he holds from God? Did Joseph Smith not, in the Book of Mormon, you don't need to say like, what quote did Joseph Smith have here or there? And like in the Book of Mormon that he called the most correct book on earth, that people would get closer to it by adhering to its principles than by any other book, did he not put in that book that, the Lamanites that they are talking about are cursed by God? And then, hey, I want Oliver Cowdery. I know who those Lamanites are. Those Lamanites are the Native Americans. You need to go convert them. You need to go teach them and stuff. And so it's not a quote here or there. It's the entire conglomeration of everything that he and his successors have taught.
Well, I would say, going back to the beginning, so what you just said was, this is what you're saying Mormonism is taught. You're saying this is but really what you're saying is this is what leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have taught. But remember, I'm saying Mormon first, right? So,
but just to clarify, the audience that we're talking to, we're not talking to people who are all different branches. Our main audience, who World Radio talks to, who I talk to 99% of the time, are not even FLDS or anything else. They're people who grew up with Hinckley and Monson and President Nelson, them who leads the church today, those prophets, seers, and revelators also being the ones that speak for God in their lives. So,
but I mean, it's still, I mean, I'm not, here to defend Howard W. Hunter, although he was a pretty good guy. He doesn't really have a lot of quotes people disagree with, but I'm not here to defend Bruce R. McConkie. Like, I'm here to say, I think the idea I think the spiritual implications of Mormonism are absolutely amazing, and there should be a space for people to talk about that. But whenever that happens, people say as well, we're LDS or ex-LDS, so Kwaku, you must relegate your whole beliefs to this institution. Well, what's the point of that? That's dumb. Like if we both think the institution messed up on certain things, and the institution Lamanite placement program, whatever you want to say, that harmed people. If the only right answer is to say all of Mormonism is bad, the whole philosophy is bad, throw it out the window, well then that's just as much of an authority grab as the people you're accusing. Because at the end of the day, if you're saying Mormonism must be defined and relegated by this school of thought or this school of thought, you're doing the same thing. Like you may not have the amount of money or the power as the people you're criticizing, but at the end of the day, you're still taking a philosophy and you're saying it belongs solely to a group of individuals, and we must believe that this version of Mormonism is all there is. And I'm saying, if the institution has done things we think are wrong, priesthood ban, Lamanite placement program, even the way funds were divvied out when Utah was being built and how certain people were starving to death. If we think, okay, that was wrong, this is where the institution harmed people. Why is it wrong for then me to take a step back and go, okay, I still believe the philosophy that stems from the restored gospel is something that needs to be studied and expanded upon and viewed from different lenses. Why is that wrong? Like, you know, you could say it's sidestepping, but I think that's a more expansive way to look at a philosophy. I mean, do you really think that if Hare Krishna said we are really the only way to view Hinduism, you'd be like, that's ridiculous. You know, ISKCON, it's great, but Hinduism is expansive, and there's so many implications that come with diving into Hinduism and what it really means. And when you put a philosophy out there, by the way, it becomes bigger than the person that just created it. The writings of de Tocqueville are bigger than him as a person. Whenever you're saying, I am here channeling divine information that I think can save the world, that becomes bigger than just you. So, you know, from my perspective, Joseph Smith doesn't have to be, Joseph Smith could have made a ton of mistakes. Joseph Smith could have messed up a lot. Joseph Smith was a human being. You look at other 19th century mystics and stuff they were channeling and stuff they were putting out into the world. You look at the Neville Goddards, you look at the Rudolf Steiners, you look at the Guy Ballards and the Edgar Caseys. Joseph Smith was one of those people. Joseph Smith was a mystic who was trying to make sense of this world and was receiving information from something on high and was putting it out into the world. And that is the philosophy, that is the world of Mormonism. That's Mormonism. That is ancient books, godhood, eternal marriage. That is like a massive, expansive field of spirituality. Just because Joseph had a failed bank or burned down a printing press or, you know, whatever, or I'm not even going to touch the polygamy because I'm fascinated by the polygamy debate that's currently happening, right, with the Rob fathering. I'm fascinated by it. I'm not even touching it because I want to learn more. But to me, that says, wait. Okay, you can have a gripe about Joseph, but what are the implications of the idea of eternal marriage? What are the implications of becoming a god? What does that actually mean? Like, we should pay attention to that. But I feel like what both the toxic aspect of the institution of being the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the toxic aspect of, you know, ex-Mormonism TM, they don't want that. They don't want you to view the philosophy by itself and separate the people who want to have like control over it. Because have you seen V for Vendetta? Mm-hmm. You know, he says, I'm going to butcher the quote. You may have bullets, but what I have are ideas, and ideas are bulletproof. And so even though they're shooting him in the alley, he's like, it doesn't matter. Because the next day you're about to see a million different V's in the street as they're like, that's the idea. It doesn't matter how much V ruined his life and messed up and did all these things that were wrong. His ideas of the freedom for the people were something really worth fighting for and really worth exploring. And that's why it's caught on. And, you know, I don't know why Mormonism can't have that. I don't know why someone can't be a member of the LDS Church. Like, well, it can't. I won't even say they can't. They are. There are people who are members of the LDS Church. They're on record. They're members of the LDS Church, but they have a more expansive view of Mormonism, and it really works. And it's something that a lot of people are interested in. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if I reject the institutional hold on Mormonism and saying that Mormonism must be defined by these, by the LDS Church's definition in every way, but then ex-Mormons say no, Mormonism is also defined by the LDS Church's definition of Mormonism, and you can't have a third view. Well, then you're kind of you're still upholding the church's authority that you think isn't real,
I have a couple of responses to that.
Also, I know I'm monologuing, but I'm trying not to.
Okay. So. Yeah, we'll move a little bit faster. No worries. Yeah. So I have a couple of responses to that, and I want to get into ideas about what you just said about it kind of doing the reverse and same thing. But before that, because I think what we're kind of talking past each other right now is we're talking about an institution and not just the philosophies, not just like, yeah, we can expand upon the ideas about what Joseph Smith taught about becoming a god or becoming, the ways that he's linking families together forever. And oh, that's an interesting philosophy and idea. I'm not saying that there isn't ideas to bring up. That's one thing, but the institution that people actually live their day-to-day lives in, that to be a member of what I'm talking about and who I speak to, is the Bergamite branch of people who have grown up sustaining and paying tithing to this LDS church, and that their entire lives were dictated by what their church leaders told them was correct. So many women having that spirituality outsourced. And so all these ideas that could be nice to think about of an expansive view, that is not what people have been allowed to play around with whatsoever. It's that to be Mormon means that you go to church on Sunday, you have to, serve a mission. And there's plenty of, modern teachings from people that you were taught and grew up to respect as mouthpieces of God, that they hold authority that you don't have and that dictate the things in your life. So an institution that is not allowing anyone to play around with those ideas. And so I don't think that it's just, ex-Mormons dictating that the church has to be that way. I think it's just an honest reflection of what people's lived experiences are based on what the church's proposition is, what it says that it is, that it's this one true church, that these are the mouthpieces of God. Stay in the boat. We will not lead you astray. It's people actually having experiences in this institution. And then furthermore, as much as I actually I am the least antagonistic in my actual feelings towards Mormonism. There's so many ways I could be Mormon again if I didn't just wholesale not believe that it's true. But there's actual institutional things that I fear for that would be taught to my kids, or that they would not be protected. And the number one reason is I have no faith in the church that if I were to raise my kids in the LDS church, that the church led by these mouthpieces of God, as they proclaim to be, would do anything to protect my kids if there was some kind of sexual assault or something going on, that they would protect themselves first and foremost. And so what I'm trying to say here is people's experiences is with an authoritative group. It's with somebody not playing around in those ideas. And it's...
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
So we have to take the words of the prophets and the leaders at their word for what they say they are. And that is what my experience was and the choices that I made. That's what so many ex-Mormons are upset about, is being told for so long not to question at all, because just even quotes from President Oaks saying research is not the answer and things like that. This fearful idea that's been taught for so long about what an apostate is, and so many literal ideas about Satan having people under their grasp if they question,
Okay, so
hit me.
This is okay. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, but okay. So I was a bit of a mistake, meaning I was not supposed to happen when I was born. Okay. I was very late. My mother is much older. She was born in 1958. The Civil Rights Act wasn't passed till 1964. Right? So she was well into elementary school before she had rights. Right? You look at the Civil Rights era and people kind of think it's forever ago because they always show pictures of MLK in black and white, but they had color cameras. They just put it in black and white to make you think it was longer ago than it was. people are still alive from it. It wasn't long ago. And I was always raised to view America with a lens of suspicion, and especially the generations that run America with a lens of suspicion. So maybe it's just that lens of I had family directly in the civil rights movement that I've heard some stories. But when I see Oaks, President Oaks, if he says, research, what is the quote you use? Research is not the answer. What is it? Questioning is not the.
It's a question from somebody who was saying, like, I have some family or friends that are doubting. How should I help them? And basically his response, I think somebody can correct me, is I would suggest that research is not the answer.
Right. I don't know how other people, and again, maybe it's a blind spot, don't just see that as old guys. Like, President Nelson is almost 100 years old. He's almost 100. At no point did I ever think that I should just believe every word these guys say. I mean, there's no way. They still are part of the wealthy ruling class of our country that has done a lot of things that are wrong. I think they're good people in the sense that you can tell that they want to help people, but everyone's mind has blinders, and we're still products of our environment. So when the apostles, kind of have that obey mindset. In Texas, I grew up having to do the American Pledge and the Texas Pledge of Allegiance every day, and if I wasn't, I got in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
We already grew up in an authoritative culture that says, obey, obey, obey. Love the troops, love our wars, respect, wave your flag, don't question, and be a good citizen. They're of that generation. They're of that mindset. And so obviously the way they're going to run an institution is going to be similar to that. That's why Liberty University and Bob Jones University and so many of these large churches that are run by these above 60-year-olds still have that mindset, because that's how they were raised. But what I'm saying is it may have been harmful, and you may have been taught don't question. And you may have really put that in, and you're like, well, I have to listen to these people. But that right there, and I'm sorry to use this word, I know you're going to cringe a little bit, but that matrix, that mind molding, that, stay within the system mindset you find in state and in religion, what I'm saying is a deep examination of Mormonism is what can free us from that. Does that make sense? So the institution that you're saying is harming people, I'm saying what has built that institution is an amazing philosophy and spiritual idea that could actually release people from the very things that are harmful and that are keeping us these cogs in the machine. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where I feel like your new age interpretations and, glomming a lot of things together. That's where I know where you're kind of going with that.
When a 75-year-old stake president is like, well, brethren, I'm very, very happy that I was alive to see the Negroes finally receive the priesthood and become the true sons of. It's like that is a 75-year-old man from Duchesne, Utah. Okay, I literally am not taking it to heart.
Well, let's talk about like the Jubilee episode that the Patreon exclusive that wasn't on the actual Jubilee YouTube video, where the question was, is masturbation a sin?
Yeah.
And yeah. I think, did you stand back in that one? You didn't agree with that? Was Timber and Carden came forward on that one, right?
Yeah, okay. Well, to be honest, that was a curveball for all of us. And I'm like, do I really want to walk into a conversation on masturbation?
Yeah.
I don't really want to do that.
Okay. Because to jump off of what you just said, because I find this attitude within so many people who are still in the Mormon church, whatever you kind of want to coin what you believe about that. But yes, in that sphere, who by one standard, it's, this church has a lot of good truth and these are the prophets. We should obey them. Yes, you can get your own revelation, but still follow them. They know the way. this is the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, and then really downplaying the things that have been taught that cause a lot of harm. And so in that discussion about masturbation, Cardin walks over and he's all kind of like falling over himself laughing of like, oh my gosh, we're really going to do this. And Cardin was talking about how masturbation, it's a sin, but it's like a parking ticket. It's like, it's not really a big deal. And then Timber, I think, was a lot more serious about it. He's like, yes, it is a sin. And so many people obviously have been taught in the church that sexual sins are next to murder, as I believe it says in the Book of Mormon. And it's not just, what Cardin was kind of attitude of like, yeah, it's one creepy person asking too many questions, or it's just this leader who said these quirky things. And I think it was John who brought up like, no, when people are raised believing that this is the prophet and the only way to fall in line with God and have the Spirit with you is to go against your nature, whether that's, being in a mixed orientation marriage or going against your nature and doing something that's actually pretty normal and healthy, which is like masturbation or something. And I think, John and the rest of the cast kind of came over and were really serious about it. Like, no, it's not just a parking ticket. People's entire worlds and their ideas about themselves and not being able to tap into that divine. And so if you're saying kind of like, if we can see that Mormonism is a way to break out of this, I'm like, how in the world do you break out of that when people are taking these prophets at their word, saying, don't do this, and following it? And it's an institution thing to me.
Here's my answer, and it's going to sound sophomoric, but think about it for a second after. Taylor Frankie Paul was soft swinging. Mormons in Utah are consistently involved in a lot of wild sexual escapades. So I'm being told at one point that the institution is that controlling, where it's robbing people of that agency and freedom to explore themselves. On the other hand, go to Provo or Orem. They're wild. The Mormons are wild. It's not the.
And I wouldn't say it's in a healthy way. That's where I'm disagreeing, though. I'm not saying it's. In my view, if there was, let me finish. My view is like, yeah, that's so much of Mormons' wildness and ex-Mormons' wildness comes out of a dysfunction of not understanding actual best practices of sexual health, for instance, and consent. Both Mormons and ex-Mormons acting out of a not healthy place of if there was a church who could teach us the best ideas and the best practices. So often the church is not only behind the times, but it, says that, there's quotes from leaders about how we're against the queers and the feminists and the intellectuals. And so Mormons grow up with this attitude to trust the church's authority over anything like a secular world might have to say, because it's going to clash with what is supposed to be revealed by these prophets and will downgrade their authority. Right. And so what you're talking about is like, no, there's lots of dysfunction. There's lots of people who are not adhering to the best morals of what the church would teach. But I'm like, I think that comes out of the proof to me that they're not prophets who think ahead of their time. And like Natasha Helfer is a good friend of mine who's a sex therapist who was excommunicated from the church. And there's channels like Seawick who, after that happened, Greg's on there and he's like, good, because she's teaching that, you can healthily masturbate or whatever. I'm like,
I'm saying though is if the institution is really that powerful and strong of robbing people of sexual liberation, why do we have a state full of people who are so overtly sexually liberated? That's my question. Like, if you think,
explain why you think that.
I don't know how to.
You think Utah is a state that's overly sexually liberated? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we Utah and has an extremely high rate of swinging. Utah has a lot of crazy sex stuff all the time. I don't know if we hang out in different circles. Not that I'm not going to sex parties, but like, I don't like, and again, maybe I've lived in the Provo Orem area too long. Half those BYU students are having sex with each other. 90% of those UVU students are having sex with each other. I don't know. I literally, and I'm not trying to be a gaslighter or anything, I legitimately do not see that painted picture of a million uptight, like, yeah, in the Wilk on Tuesday on BYU campus, you'll find some of those people. The vast majority of members of the church who are below 30, I know, who are unmarried, are not virgins. Okay, they like I don't see that world crafted. Like I legitimately don't know, and maybe you're not like I don't know. I just I don't see it. Like if you were to take all of my friends who were all LDS and unmarried, 9 out of 10 have had sex multiple times and are actively having sex, and then when they decide they want to get serious, they'll stop for a couple months and get a temple recommend, and they'll go get married. And I'm not trying to like downplay the faithfulness of the members. I know everyone's gonna be mad about that. That's just kind of the reality of how it looks. So I really don't see the same world. Like I'm trying to fill you here. I really don't like. I don't see it. I don't.
Okay, so even if you don't see it, you can at least, I hope, understand the attitude that, I mean, I'm 35, and the way that I was raised, none of my friends had sex before they were married. Almost all of us, got married in the temple as virgins. And I feel like from the people that I interview on Mormon Stories and the people that I interact with, because I get such a diverse amount of ex-Mormons raised from all over. And I do feel like that is the general attitude is they do believe the prophets at their word, that this is a sin next to murder, whether it's masturbation or premarital sex, and have a lot of trauma around being asked not just maybe invasive questions, but also feeling immense amount of shame for just having natural developmental attitudes. Would you deny that like the church, by and large, generally speaking, if you walk into an LDS building and the general population of bishops and stake presidents are not going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you had sex. Everybody in Quake's friend group is having sex too. And
no, yeah.
Did that camera turn off? Shit. Oh, should turn back on. All right, and I will figure out why this camera just turned off. And one sec. Come on, little guy.
Did I black out here? Oh,
there you go.
Oh, there I am.
Okay, continue.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Well. I can't speak to, weird bishop interviews. Obviously, I don't think, young girls or boys should be doing the worthiness interviews in regard to sexual anything. With a bishop, I think it's kind of weird. And I do like that now it's an option to have a parent in the room, but I mean, I hate to break it to you, 12-year-old and 13-year-old boys we all know you can't really stop it. But I don't know. And literally maybe this is my own social blinder here, but I just don't like, if there are people that said, look, I trusted, and I literally was taught by the church not to have sex, and I didn't, and I never did anything wrong, and it totally messed me up sexually, then like that's wrong. Like that's totally wrong. I guess my question though is if the institution that is run by that elderly generation in which that was the norm, how they were growing up, and that's really what they're putting out now, I want to ask, are the ramifications of that as bad as what you're saying? Because in my lived experience, I literally just don't see it. And maybe I thought you were like 29, by the way. I think you're 35. But like maybe the culture's changed that quickly. Maybe it really has. And again, also maybe it's the industry I work in. I work in festivals and concerts and parties, right? So the people I'm exposed to are a little bit different than, maybe you're run of the mill guy who's having a Sunday picnic, with his ward chorister girlfriend. I don't know. But I really just I think if you were to go and poll all of the Mormon YSA areas, Rexburg, Provo, Gilbert, Mesa, I think you'd find that the majority are not virgins at all.
And in your opinion, though,
and that shows that the institutional stranglehold on sexual, what's the word I'm looking for? The institution that has a stranglehold on people's sexual lives and it stops them from exploring themselves. I'm saying I don't think that stranglehold is that powerful at all if the vast majority just are unfazed by it and are doing what they want. Like,
that's my question, though. Are they unfazed by it? Because I would say that people are, they get a little bit close and they end up having sex, and they're not virgins anymore. But are they unfazed by it, or are they filled with immense amount of guilt? Because that would be what my experience is from the people that I have talked to, that it's been a soul-crushing amount of guilt and shame, that, if there's a maker and he wants you to know him, and he has these tenets and these ordinances and you can understand them through the temple, I just don't think that the shame that Mormonism and the, instead of being a forward proposition of something that is so enlightening, it's like, do your best, and if you can't, you still get to be with your family. It's a absolutely don't do this, don't touch it, don't cross the line, or else you will be separated from your family. It's a very negative proposition. And so people are operating from a place of fear, a place of shame is how I would say. And so it's like, are they unfazed? It's like, no, I think people are scared and they're repressed for the most part. And then if they go a little bit too far, they're still stuck in shame and repression. But they think that the only way, because the way that they've been taught is that this is where the medicine is. So the way John and I honestly talk about it, and a lot of people in the ex-Mormon space, is a church that makes you sick in a way by telling you to go against some things that are, it's not just about sex, it's about a lot of different things that give you the sickness, and then tell you that they're their prescription, and then you're on this nonstop hamster wheel, but you're still operating from a place of shame and fear. And the camera went off again. You can talk though, it's still
yeah, I mean, perhaps, I mean, if that's someone's experience, that's their experience. I'm not gonna be like, oh, well, your experience is invalid. But
would you say, hold on, let me stop you. Would you, not just that that's their experience, but would you deny that that is systemic across the ways that people live Mormonism?
Well, for there to be a system, people have to participate in it. And what I'm saying is, from my lived experience, that doesn't seem to be the ramifications of it. So I'm doubting how strong that stranglehold is if and again, we're operating off of like without actual firm numbers here, right? But I would venture to say the majority of the Mormon YSA pockets in America are full of non-virgins, and of those non-virgins, it's people who don't really have sexual trauma. And that's me being 100% honest. Like, I think if you were to show this video to people in Gilbert, Mesa, Provo, Orem, Rexburg, who are under 30, they'd go, yeah, it seems about right. I mean, have you ever... Well, another thing is, what is one of the biggest economic opportunities for YSA men in Mormon culture? It's summer sales. It's door-to-door sales, right? We send out thousands and thousands every year. The summer sales culture is not sexually repressed whatsoever. It is, so much of it is make a lot of money, get a nice car, go to the gym, get hot, and get hot chicks. Like, that is literally, these guys are like, want to be Jordan Belfort types. Like, obviously they want to stay members of the church, but they're trying to go wild. I've just seen so much of that. That's why when I hear the conversations around like the Mormon sexual repression, I'm always like, did you live in a different Provo than me? Because I really don't. I don't know. I don't want to beat a dead horse.
Yeah, let me side tangent to one thing, because the church is so conservative, and from the top down, I'm saying I would venture to guess that the church leaders themselves would be like a pro abstinence education in schools, right?
For sure.
We know though that like abstinence only education actually leads to more pregnancies and leads to more STDs, and people not knowing how, when they are going to be sexually active, how to, ask for consent. And so those things. And so if the topic at hand here is what I would say is like the best tools to live the healthiest life that cause the least amount of harm, do Mormons either living the tenets of the church, do they live that life? And then ones who would, what I would feel like what you're saying is people who are able to live these other types of not so sexually oppressed lives and are not following the rules of Mormonism as much, I still don't think either of those lead to the happiest, healthiest sexual development, because neither is giving people the information. I
agree.
Right. And so
100% agree.
So, yeah. So the aspect that I'm most worried about, if we're circling back to ideas about, the Mormonism and Joseph Smith having these new, more expansive, helpful ideas. I'm like, well, in 2024, how it is actually manifesting today, it still does not curb, and it doesn't actually it's not forwarding the things, regardless, that we can tell from science and psychological best practices. And that's where my issue is. And so my last point is just that even if there are Mormons who are out having sex and so forth, I'm still worried that they were not taught ideas about consent because they're still so informed by the patriarchy. I can't tell you how many friends when I was Mormon who told me that they were sexually assaulted while they were Mormon. And I didn't believe them at first because I'm like, no, like Mormon guys wouldn't do that. Like, no, and not believing women because of, I still think that even if there is that kind of sex going on, I can't believe that it's doing anything to actually forward like less harm by people, because the ways that they're interacting are not informed by best practices.
So no, I agree with everything you said. So here's my thought on that, though, is what you're saying is the ramifications as played out by the harmful parts of a purity culture can create people who are sexually unintelligent and even harmful, where then you have people that grew up repressed and then their minds are warped. And so now when they want to go wild, they end up becoming more on the RAPIST side. All right. Mm-hmm. There's things like that happen. However, that problem, as evil as it is heavy in every college with a large frat community has that massive problem, right? Right. Most of the problems you're describing are problems that are part of North American culture. I mean, how many men in America are addicted to pornography, like addicted to it, right? I mean, it is creating a mental pandemic in the country. So if those problems that we're talking about that come runway of institutional teachings by people of the elder generation, and that same elder generation is still running the other institution in this country, religious and non-religious, and they're having the same problems. To me, the answer isn't to say, well, that means Mormonism is bad. It's, again, the people running those institutions and that elderly generation whose mindset is still in the 40s and 50s does not translate to 2024. And so the ramifications of that are harmful for people. But if I can't find that solely in Mormonism, to me that says that can't be a Mormon problem. And the real solution isn't necessarily to say, okay, well, this will stop if the LDS Church is destroyed. Because let me tell you, at Florida State, I guarantee you there are a lot of RAPISTS out there, okay? At UC Berkeley, I guarantee you there are a lot of RAPISTS out there. So, and there's sexual inefficacy and there's sexual addictions all throughout the country that don't stem from Mormonism at all, but are the same things we say played out in Utah and Idaho and Arizona. So if that's the case, then stopping institution won't stop that. Stopping getting, if the LDS Church disappeared tomorrow, that class of being, that class of person who is either addicted to porn, or sexually harming people, they're not going to disappear. So I would then have to say, what is the problem then? And all the things we're naming that are harmful about the institution are, again, those things that are harmful about Western American culture. And it's because of that elder generation that is still running everything. The same problems we have about misogyny in the church, I guarantee, what was it last Sunday? The movement there was to skip church.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take a wild guess and say none of those women are voting for Donald Trump. I'm just gonna take a wild guess and assume the vast majority aren't. And what? So if they're writing columns, they're saying LDS Church is built in misogyny. Okay, if the church disappeared tomorrow, if every chapel and temple was gone, and Temple Square was a giant park tomorrow, Donald Trump would still be the Republican nominee, and his kind of thinking about women would still be prevalent in the country. Porn would still be an addiction. RAPISTS would still be running around. We would still have movies that glorify sexual violence, sexual assault. That would all still exist. So, like, I know I see what you're saying, but I'm saying I don't think the solution is burn down the institution. I think the solution is burn down all the institutions, rethink the entire world we're born into, completely rebel against the order and the way our minds are molded from children to now. It's in public education. It's in government. It's in film. It's in music. It's in everything that makes money for the top 10%. It's 100% there. Getting rid of Mormonism isn't going to stop that, So yeah, I do agree that the institution, can create some of those problems, and that is harmful and that is wrong, and those people have had a lot of joy taken out of their lives. But at the same time, that is a problem of that is not a problem inherent to Mormonism specifically. That's a problem that comes from the elder generation and the institutions that run a country. And I mean, I've heard Elder Holland say sexual sin is next to murder. I think that's a misinterpretation of the Book of Mormon. I don't believe it's saying sexual sin is next to murder. He's describing the rampant horrific lifestyle that he's purchasing prostitutes, and he's lying, and he's stealing from people. He's just becoming a terrible person, and he's destroying the actual belief in God of other people. He's destroying their divine connection. And he says, don't you know that these things are next to murder? He doesn't single out, sexual sin. So I think, again, that's the interpretation that comes from that post-Puritan 1930s, 40s, and 50s perspective that we've read into the scripture. And now with that perspective, it can be harmful. But for people like me that are saying, why don't we read it without those lenses, without those goggles? And actually, it's going to help fix the problems that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, all right. I'm going to go back.
So, first I'd say that, again, I think you are uniting. I'm not sure if just in your mind you're doing this or for sake of your viewers, Mormonism with the LDS Church. But you've got to separate the two, because I guarantee if you sat Josh Gailey down right here, one of the leaders in Church of Jesus Christ Baker tonight, they've got a couple different chapels all over Pennsylvania. I think they're the third largest LDS church, or even like Denver Snuffer, or one of those, sat someone down. They would say you are still believing the authority of the LDS church because you believe you're saying the religious idea of Mormonism is dictated by one institution. So, but that can't be true. I can still, if I disagree with what a Presbyterian says, it doesn't mean that I am throwing out all of Protestantism. And so, you said that, that use the Thomas Edison analogy that you got from Jonathan Streeter. Well, Mormonism is only 200 years old. This idea that a philosophy is done after 200 years because, some people in one institution decide to leave, that you can't measure the weight of a spiritual movement or a philosophy by that. You can't do it. I mean, there aren't as many Zoroastrians as there were, but the Zendavesta still stands. Zoroastrianism still stands, right? So I think what you're saying is Mormonism is only as good as the power that the institution has. But that is still believing that you're still giving more credence to the institution that you don't believe in. Do you see what I'm saying? And you say, well, those are 19th century ideas. Scholars have looked at it. That's still authority consciousness you're following. You're still saying, well, the PhDs and the smart people have said this thing, so I must believe them. You're still falling into the same authority consciousness that you found harmful in the LDS Church.
Let me respond real quick. So I think that's fair. I think that, I'm speaking to, again, people who were raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who usually have left it. We're talking about, I'm friends with a lot of Mormon historians, and I love Ben Park and his story of retelling Mormonism start to finish in American Zion is really thorough and interesting. But, when people think of Mormonism and what it is what Benjamin Park talks about. It's this story of Joseph Smith from this to this to this. And it is, again, this proposition of authority. So I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is what it was taught to me, and this is what its proposition to the world is a proposition of authority. And so, no, I'm not saying like I'm still holding on. I don't know. It sounds like you're kind of saying that I'm saying that I hold on to their authority stronger than they do. No,
I'm saying that you're saying that Mormonism is defined by the LDS Church's claim of authority over it. But I'm saying if you can't separate Mormonism from the LDS Church, then you have kind of tricked yourself into still falling into the same consciousness as you were before of the thing you don't like. Because, again, ideas are bulletproof. Ideas don't go away. But if you're saying the idea of Mormonism does not work because of the way I've been taught it by the LDS Church, you're not letting the religion, or you're not letting the philosophy breathe. You're still letting the church have authority over the ideas. But as someone who's ex-Mormon, theoretically, you should be able to not only separate yourself from the LDS Church, you should be able to separate Mormonism from the LDS Church. You should be able to,
it's kind of going back to the discussion we had earlier about Joseph Smith saying that he came to restore the gospel and not the kingdom. Is that kind of where you're going?
Yes. And this is where I get in trouble in Ward Radio. Okay. This is where I get in trouble. But whatever. So,
here, wait, let's pause on that because that's interesting. That is a lot of people who have a more conservative, mainstream Orthodox view, where I think that's honestly an interesting thing to add, that we shouldn't sidestep that you get in trouble for those things, because what you're saying right now is, one way to look at Mormonism that probably isn't very Orthodox and very common. And I would say, I think does like a disingenuous feeling towards the being your brother's keeper, of honestly engaging with what people, as they experience the orthodoxy, as they're raised in it, what that authority has actually played out in their life to detrimental ways. Follow me?
Yeah,
I think to be the most Christ conscious in the most expansive way outside of Mormonism at all, where Mormonism can be like a window into those higher states of consciousness. I think that the best way to do that is to, yes, like be your brother's keeper and to mourn with those that mourn, which so often I feel like that is the opposite of what Ward Radio does. And so many Mormon podcasters, it is distancing themselves from the pain that is actually caused by these doctrines and things that just don't work for people as they go through their life as a Mormon, and mocking them in that pain, saying that's a you problem instead of an institution problem. And that's, I think,
there's no doubt that not everyone's path is the same. Some people legitimately do not connect with the Mormon philosophy at all, or anything of its implications. Some people, it's just not your path. We're not all going to have the same path. That's absolutely clear. You know what Jesus says in the New Testament? He says, if a man says, look here, look there is the kingdom of God, believe him not, for the kingdom of heaven is within, right? One of the most important verses in the Bible, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is within. Joseph Smith says, the church and the kingdom of God are separate things. The Book of Mormon ends with there being no church, but nothing more than one person trying to connect to the kingdom of heaven. There is a trail here of an idea that is still Mormon, but may differentiate from the manual perspective. But I want to explore that one. There's enough people. We have 9,000 Come Follow Me podcasts, right? There's enough people giving the manual version. I'm saying, though, like me, I want to explore that side of it. Because if that side is ultimately what I believe Joseph Smith was trying to convey to the world, then it's definitely worth exploring, and it's definitely going to last. If I'm not here to say people didn't have their experiences. I'm not here to say, who's the creepy Colorado former state president, McConkey's grandson, who is a kid diddler and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to say that doesn't happen. No, that's evil. It's wrong. I mean, absolutely. And that guy had a position in the church, and he abused it, and he was allowed to do that for so long because there weren't systems in place that were able to catch him, and he was evil. He's alive, so he is evil, okay? Completely. That can still be true, and people can still have those experiences, while I also say, okay, I want to know everything I can about what OG Joseph Smith is trying to bring, because from my research, it seems as if it's a message that could fix the very problems we're fighting against right now. This is something else people don't want to say. In the Book of Mormon, the churches are often the villains. You love your fine temples and your jewelry, right? There's the whole part of the Book of Mormon where it talks about the churches are actually corrupt. And the Book of Mormon ends with there being no church. So I'm not sure how much of a 19th century idea that is, but I think it's really relevant in 2024. Mm-hmm. I think the Book of Mormon is extremely relevant in 2024, especially with regard to the downfall of the civilization and how people become extremely separated, cold-hearted, and vicious towards one another. The Book of Mormon is extremely prophetic in regards to how divide and conquer tactics leave everyone dead. I think it's extremely prophetic in regard to the subject of race relations. I think it's extremely prophetic for today, but that's also because I decided to go and read it without any kind of institution blinders. I said I'm going to read this and I'm going to come to the conclusions by just what my consciousness and my mind are saying. And sometimes I get a different interpretation, but those different interpretations are worth discussing in the public square because they may actually lead to the solutions that we both agree. Solutions to problems we both agree here are real problems. Mm-hmm. So me saying this isn't to go and say, oh, well, you didn't really experience that. You're just, you should never complain about what happened in the church. I have made fun of my experience at BYU and my horror time I had sometimes at BYU with the Honor Code office. I have criticized the church plenty of times online and video on record, right? Plenty of times. So, I think there's definitely room for both. But I just don't want to fall into any kind of consciousness that disallows me to examine an idea outside of the people who claim to own that idea.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a follow-up then. So you believe in the Book of Mormon. The title of this is the Book of Mormon true? Which I hope we can get into that more.
Yeah.
As we keep going, you tell me how much time you have left. We're at 2 hours and 4 minutes right now.
Oh my gosh, people are listening to me for 2 hours. They're going to lose their minds.
Did you know we've had up to like 850 people in the live stream right now? So thank you guys. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
my phone is. I can't see my phone screen. It's flipped over for a reason because I know the minute I flip it, it's going to be missed calls, text. What are you doing?
I'm having fun. I can stay for as long as you want to because I do want to get into some more things. But you tell me when you're ready to wrap up. And so, I have Dan Vogel, probably the most, I would say, prominent historian of Joseph Smith's life and work is actually in the chat. And
great.
So as you have been talking, I have been highlighting a couple things that Dan Vogel has to say. And if you don't know who that is, please go check out his YouTube channel and his work. I really like a lot of the things that he discusses and has investigated. And he does bring up a good point that I wanted to ask. So eventually those lights are going to be going off. Book of Mormon being true through whatever revelatory process we can get into, that you believe that it did come about by, let's just baseline say, the power and spirit of God, revelation of some kind. So Dan says Joseph Smith set up the institution by the same inspiration by which he translated the Book of Mormon. I feel like what he's trying to get at there is a lot of what I have is I take people at their word when they say that they speak on behalf of God and they're restoring something, and this is the way to know their maker. It's through reading this book and through this institution that's the same power. That if you believe the Book of Mormon is true, but it's like, do you also have to believe the institution in which Joseph Smith set up through that same revelatory process? Your thoughts?
I'm trying to... I already know I'm going to get clipped in memes. I may as well say whatever. Do you know who Patrice O'Neal, the comedian, is?
Yes.
Okay. There is this clip I saw of him on TikTok, and he uses the most vulgar explanation for exactly what you're talking about. And he says, "Look, if you see a guy, I'll filter it to make it sound less ridiculous. If you see a guy bashing himself in the head with a lamp, okay, and then he stops and he says 2 + 2 is 4, and he keeps bashing himself in the head with the lamp. Does that mean 2 + 2 isn't 4? No, right? If Pythagoras gives us a Pythagorean theorem, and at the same time starts a bizarre cult, the weird Pythagorean cult, it doesn't mean a squared plus b squared isn't equal c squared.
Mm-hmm. People are asking me to interrupt you more, so I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry. Oh no, now my camera went off. Well, I guess I can't. Continue.
Oh, so Dan Vogel can say, "Oh well, I think it was all a sham," but that just comes down to, I guess, that debate on what the Book of Mormon's saying. Is it real? What was Nephi real? Did Jesus really visit the Americas? And I mean, that's where the debate is. And non-LDS people who believe in the Book of Mormon would still affirm that it's true. And that's kind of hints to what I've kind of been, the dead horse I've been beating the whole time is, the Strengites don't have the same history as the LDS Church, but they still believe in the Book of Mormon. When I talked with Josh Gailey from the Bakertonites, who have quite a bit of members, they're kind of forgotten about, but they're still a pretty relevant church within the Northeast. Half the time when people are talking to him about, what about the temple? He's like, we're the 1830 church. We don't have a temple. It's like, well, the garments. He goes, we don't have garments. Doctrine and Covenant, we have the Book of Mormon in the Bible. We're the 1830 church. You try to have a conversation with him about some of the more LDS topics. He goes, none of it matters to us. We're a different branch of Mormonism. So when you talk to him, you go, wow, interesting. I have put so much of LDS into Mormonism. I forgot that it stands without the LDS church. So, but okay, that's lots to say about that. But yeah, is the Book of Mormon true? Should we just get into that?
Yeah, let me ask you one follow-up question, and just kind of repeating back what I hear you saying is that because of your view that Joseph Smith, restored these aspects of Mormonism, that there are so many different ways to interpret that and live up to that is, yes, outside of the mainstream LDS church. But that leads me to a great super chat. Mikhail Pratt, thanks for the $5. He wrote, Quaker, do you believe all Mormon sects are valid? Do priesthood authority claims matter? If not, what's an example of a Mormon philosophy that matters?
Well, like I said earlier, when the scriptures say, save it be but two churches, the Church of the Lamb of God versus the Church of the Devil, I don't believe that saying the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as the 501c3 tax-deductible organization is the Church of the Lamb of God, and everyone else is from Satan. Because the way Christ uses the word church is, Jesus didn't have a 501c3 in the New Testament. That didn't exist. Ecclesia, called out ones, awakened ones, people who, in my opinion, are seeking that divine light. I think there is there is the church, as in the people in an organization who follow a hierarchy, who have, go to the same buildings and participate in these callings. But then there's the church, as in people who follow the Lord. Christ says, "This is my church and my doctrine," and Jesus makes it super, super easy as to what counts as to be a member of his church. And I think when we're going to get to heaven, we're going to be like, wow, there's a lot more people here who disagree with me than I thought. Because it's the ego that tells us, a church is one 501c3 organization and those who have adherence to that 501c3 organization. Mm-hmm. That's not the biblical or scriptural definition of church. It isn't.
So what I hear you saying is that the way that the prophets right now that lead up the LDS church, they have a incorrect interpretation, that they stand in authority that so many people obey and listen to and sustain, but they have an incorrect principle that they are teaching that is not so exclusive to how you have to live to be counted as a follower of Christ and to be in the celestial kingdom. That's what I hear you saying.
Well, in 1978, the church released an official, statement from the first presidency called God's Love for All Mankind, in which the first presidency said Buddha, Muhammad, Confucius, and many Protestant leaders are inspired by God, and that those faiths are not evil and that they have validity. I just go one step further and say God is God over all people in most religions, and we're all finding our way back to the light.
So
the word church is... We got to stop looking at churches like they're football teams, like we have on jerseys, and it's us versus, church is those who are awakened, those who are born again, dare I say, born out of the matrix. That's what it's those people who've said Jesus is the way to awaken out of this awful situation.
But let me interrupt for a second.
So to answer this question,
go ahead.
They all matter. The guy who commented that, do all sex matter? All the Mormon sects matter, of course. Duh. You'll never catch me saying, those guys. Maybe some of the Southern Utah ones who are a little bit trappy in the, I'm not going to go on record and say they're doing a great job, but I think the majority of the Mormon denominations are doing a great job and they matter.
And on the subject of priesthood, the church says that, the priesthood is the way to act on behalf of God, to hold the keys for the administering of these ordinances that are found in the temples that are dedicated, that they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars building all over the world. Are you saying that people can, when they become enlightened in coming into this Christ within this church, with kind of, I don't want to repeat everything you just said, but do you believe then that the temples and the priesthood and the millions of dollars that go into doing these ordinances, that those are of the highest importance, the way that the LDS church would say that they are? That is a good allocation of funds?
Don't throw that at me.
It's a question.
I'm not an accountant or an economist. I'm not going to don't throw that at me. But
Italy had a chandelier that cost $600,000. Yes or no? Would you sign that check and say, just kidding? No, I think it's an important question to ask, because we are frustrated because the things you're talking about are yes, the ways that we love and expand our consciousness are all nice and fine and good. But going back to the follow the prophet primary thing, I'm where people pay their tithing, where people are actually putting their time into these rituals and doing work for the dead, when there's so many people who can be loved better and can be served better by this time and this money being spent in other places. I think it's a really important question that hits at the heart of so many Mormons, in my experience, who want to do good and serve good, but the way that they're told to do it is still with money and allocation that I don't agree with. But.
So is the question, is your question the priesthood question or the finances one?
But just overall, let's say, is the allocation of funds for millions and millions of dollars to not only in the rainy day fund or whatever they want to call it for Christ's coming. The church is obviously, with the Widows Mite report, has over $100 billion that the church has. And then the majority of the places that they spend it are in temples. And I would say, what you just said would oppose the spending of the church putting a lot of its money into temples, when sounds like you're saying all different types of Mormon sects, they have this, they have rights to authority and priesthood just the same. So is that a good allocation of funds if it's so universal? It's kind of
okay, I see your question. Well, yeah. Okay, so you have to U-turn a little bit, because when we describe priesthood, priesthood power, priesthood ordinances, the first question is, why is our priesthood, quote unquote, better than others? But the claim of most Mormon sects, in regard to the priesthood, is it's a claim that other Christian churches aren't fighting for. So when you say we have the only priesthood, we have the restored priesthood, nobody else has that. Nobody else claims to have a priesthood given to them in modern day, by angels coming down from heaven. It's a claim that no one else is claiming to have anyway. And if we say, well, only with this priesthood can you enter the temple to perform these ordinances, that's totally fine. It's not like we're going and saying, hey, by the way, every church wants this priesthood and these ordinances, and we're the only ones that have them. Well, no, other churches don't want it, and they don't really care. So we've kind of created our own terms and are acting with it. But if other Mormon sects don't deem those necessary, it doesn't mean that ours are somehow invalid because they're not validated by the other Mormon sects. Again, truth, especially metaphysical truth, isn't determined by how many people say they like the idea. That just becomes follow the leader consciousness. If temples are, looks like I'm back. Temples are great things if you believe in that. I guess here's the New Age answer to that would be, if you believe in manifesting, you believe in frequencies, you believe that our thoughts actually can create reality, and that there's something to aligning your thoughts in this life with how your life is going to be in the next, and that in the vast expansiveness of the universe and universes and cosmos and all those things, there's a way that we can actually unite our spirits to be with each other. And I think that's a phenomenal idea. I think if the church is making the claim, hey, we have no clue, what's going to happen in regard to our social unity in the next life, but we do believe we can play a role in that by creating, a reality in which we are with those people, and the temple is a way to create that reality for us. That's totally chill. I think that's super cool. And you don't know what you don't know. So I don't think it's invalid at all. Obviously, people are, Doctrine and Covenants is at 138, where you've got Alvin Smith, who's in the celestial kingdom. And this is before anything was restored. And Joseph's like, how did he make it to heaven before the gospel is restored? Well, how'd that happen? And the Lord says, all those who died without a knowledge, who would have received it, will still be heirs of the celestial kingdom. So it's like, well, so you don't necessarily need it? He says, well, if you had a heart that would have received it, which to me suggests it's a lot more about who you are and how you love and where your consciousness is aligned. And everything else, what we do to ritualize that, to manifest it in the afterlife, there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. I think it's totally fine for the church to build those temples, because that acts as an esoteric groundwork and framework for unity in the next life.
All right.
Sacrifices today. It's just called, the sacrifices are for countries, and we do it by making our blood sacrifices, people in uniform who die in other countries. Same world. It's we haven't changed that much. With all the technological progression, we're still the same people. There's a reason why I can FaceTime somebody in Australia right now, and we all have the ability to do that. but we still need signs in the bathroom that say wash your hands, please. So we haven't really changed that much. We're still kind of the same primal people we always have been. But again, if you're looking at the restored gospel from this perspective of this, the temples, we need to find the temple ceremony written in ancient Jewish literature, in Babylonian papyri, and it needs to be the exact same thing to prove this is legitimate. That wouldn't prove it's legitimate at all. Even if you found tomorrow a stone, Solomon's temple ritual, here's what you got to do, and we go, wow, this is exactly like what we do today. It wouldn't make it legitimate. That just makes it more ancient. What makes the temple ceremony legitimate is found in here. If you truly believe that your reality is going to be shaped by these ordinances, and that believing that these ordinances are so will unite my spirit with my loved one in the vast expansiveness of forever one day, that is what makes it legitimate. Legitimacy of ordinances is not found in how far back you can prove it on papyri. That just means you found it a long time ago. What I'm suggesting and saying is that the legitimacy of what it's claiming to actually, how it's claiming to benefit you, I'm saying that is legitimate. And that's a completely spiritual thing. 100%. You can't prove it, but I don't want it to be proved.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of this is all kind of going around in circles about, again, like definitions of true and utility versus, what's the word? Like utility beliefs versus vitality beliefs. I can't remember if that's the right word. When things, the word true can be broken down for different people does it have a utility to it? Or is it a valid thing because it can be proven? A validity Mormon versus a utility Mormon is kind of how it's termed. And a lot of people are members of the church because of the utility that it provides them. And some, they don't care a lot about the things that people say, the truth claims actually fleshing out and being true and to what the prophets have said that they are. And they have a utility to it. Or they are validity Mormons who they do take the prophets at their word. And it kind of reminds me of this old, if anyone's seen it, let me know. Quaker, tell me if you've ever seen, there's a really famous discussion / debate between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson from maybe like 2017, I'm going to think. And Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson are butting heads for probably 3 hours straight, going in circles and circles and circles about how we know something is true. What does it mean for something to be true? And one of the analogies I always think is really fascinating that they bring up is they're saying, like, if somebody kidnaps you and puts a gun to your head and says, the only way I'm not going to kill you is if you name all of the presidents of the United States in order. And then you do that, but they are out of order. And the ways that they were wrong were actually the same way that the crazy killer also had them in their head that were wrong. But even though you were actually incorrect in listing the order of the presidents to save your life, it's a utility that it was actually true because it helps you get out of a bind, out of a pinch, right? That whole idea. And so what I hear you saying right now is, the utility that it provides a person is of the most paramount value, as opposed to what so many ex-Mormons and people are like, but it's not the proposition of what we said was true. It's that's not the list of what the presidents are, it's not. And on top of that, I don't believe I can get spirituality from that. And so my example with the temple is most people I would say that I've talked to going through the temple, it's a huge shock. And it's like the first time they really felt like they were in a cult. And to me, I was raised to have such a strong relationship with God, and I feel like I did. And that's why my disillusionment with the church really started in the temple, because of the handshakes, because I was suddenly, these rituals were not serving the type of God that I was worshiping, because I could not wrap my brain around that the God that was in my soul and my spirit cared about handshakes at all. He has our attention. He has something he needs to tell us, and it's handshakes are kind of a way to get into heaven, and these are the rituals to do it, And so I didn't see the validity or the utility in the temple.
I mean, that's fair.
I'm just saying, I think that's really indicative of a bigger pattern within Mormonism, that it doesn't have the validity. It doesn't have, they're not saying things that are even remotely true or remotely serving. And people put those pieces together enough and go on their own types of journeys, again, with the discarding of the filaments. But,
well, I mean, again, if it's not your path, it's not your path. But
the church would say that it should be everyone's path. That, like, I would argue that, that the church is there to tell you that,
and the church will say something else in 80 years. Again,
it's just people's throughout history, when they changed its doctrines plenty of times, and they say doctrine doesn't change, and church historians like Greg Prince all of the, obviously
the LDS Church has
changed its doctrines, right? Yeah, that whole point.
But you're still doing
go for it. What am I doing?
Still doing the thing where you're saying this is Mormonism.
Yeah, but my point is, the way that people do interact with it, it's a wholesale rejection of the proposition that has been made to us over and over again. So let's move into stuff about the Book of Mormon. Do you believe the Book of Mormon is historical, or are you just like it's got the best spiritual teachings in it? What everything that's been said about the Book of Mormon, and I think this is a good segue into validity.
Yes, I think
versus. So what is your opinion on the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, I think it happened. I think it's historical. I think it's really legitimately happened. That's what I think.
Okay, I'm going to ask you. We're going to do quick fire shots of a bunch of different things. So,
all right.
The first thing that comes to mind, one thing that when I was Mormon, and I absolutely believed it was historical as well, Joseph Smith said that the hill Cumorah was behind his house. It's a clean hill. None of those battles happened there. And I think, again, historians would say that the Book of Mormon came about in a time that, this is what you'd expect to be in the Book of Mormon. It answers questions about why are these dark-skinned people here, and has all kinds of Protestant sermons in it. And also Joseph Smith didn't know that Christ wouldn't be coming in his lifetime. So I think that's a big, mean feature of what Joseph Smith taught, that Christ was coming, and it didn't really matter if things were going to be fact-checked. So on aspects about where it actually took place, Joseph Smith said that the hill Cumorah that's spoken about in the Book of Mormon is this hill that's, over by his house. How do you square those kinds of things?
Well, I'd like to see the quote. Because I can't react to a quote I've never.
All right, let's say, hypothetically speaking, Joseph Smith said, the hill Cumorah that I am getting these plates out of, because that's really what would make sense, that these battles took place in what Rod Meldrum and Hannah Stoddard and so many traditionalists.
I see what
they
you're
would
saying.
Say that they're taking Joseph Smith at his words, that the Book of Mormon not only happened, but it happened in the places that Joseph Smith talked about, and the hill Cumorah is the hill Cumorah, and that when Lehi and his family parked their boat, the traditionalist view is that if Joseph Smith said that it happened here on this American continent, that it happened here. And Joseph Smith was restoring what Tim Ballard and all kinds of the people in the traditionalist faction call the American covenant. That the only way for the Book of Mormon to even make sense.
I'm saying you're going down a rabbit hole I do not subscribe to. Okay, so no.
So you're pro sex trafficking, is what you're saying.
Hey, look, I defended Tim Ballard in the sense that I don't believe public excommunications by tabloid are okay. I think that was not right. But I'm also not going to judge them until.
Do you want me to fix that?
Kara, this is going to fall. And
honestly rest
it's going to fall on camera. And it'll
rest.
They're going to say, hey, Kwaku destroyed Kara Burrell's mic.
Keep talking. All right. Keep going. I don't know why it doesn't. Continue. You can talk and we'll...
Okay, so basically, here's what I think about... Okay, so you're not claiming that Joseph Smith made the claim that the ending battles of Cumorah were in his backyard. He didn't claim that. He claimed that the plates, where he got the plates, were on the hill. That we then say this is the hill Cumorah from the Book of Mormon. Because I'm not going to go and say I think the hill Cumorah was in his backyard, the hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon. But what I will say is, you look at the Joseph interactions with the plates. Sometimes the plates would disappear out of thin air. Right? Like there was a magical quality to them when he wasn't being as righteous, they would disappear and he couldn't translate them. Right. There's this back and forth relationship with the plates, according to Joseph Smith's history, that makes them a lot more of like a magical talisman type of thing. So the hill Cumorah could have been the hill Cumorah, meaning the hill of where the plates are, the record of the people, and not necessarily the battleground. I mean, we're talking about golden plates that are given to him by an angel that are disappearing at will of the angel and can only be translated. I mean, the whole thing is a magical process.
Yeah, and that's...
and I'm fine with that. But if like to say, okay, well, logically, if the hill Cumorah was, if hill Cumorah, where the plates are buried, it logically must be the same place the battle was. Well, logically, Native Americans can't come back from the dead glowing. Logically, rocks can't translate things through hats. Logically, none of this is real. But the point is, it was all divine miracles that allowed this thing to happen. That's the point. Mm-hmm. To me, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I remember when you made that quote on the TITS program, and I specifically remember because this is my early TikTok days. Quake, you probably have no idea how many responses I made to you on TikTok back in the olden days. And it was taking that quote out, and I made a whole TikTok where I got a really cool jacket on just like you, and I did a whole like as if MTV was, the new hip, cool, young welcome to Latter-day Zion or something. I called my show, and it was like, we're going to listen to Mormon apologists and stuff. And I played that clip because I remember you specifically saying on that like, we're talking about an angel and like Moroni who can travel, and you explained all of those things in that program. And my point then is still my point now to so many apologists who will point to things within the Bible and this wider context and worldview about like, well, there's also talking donkeys. And it's like, what I'm getting at is people are upset because there's just so many things that they took as not just truth that doesn't hold up to modern archaeology and, scholarship and so many things they're told is true. And then it doesn't match up with archaeology. And then their faith crisis is really not taken seriously because now the entire paradigm is what's being called into question. And so, no, it's not just like, okay, well, if you believe that God can talk to donkeys and God has all these different ways of revealing his truth, just to me, it's like, well, just go along with another one. Just suspend your disbelief for all these additional things. And my argument to that is like, no, the entire paradigm is now being called into question because feels like these prophets, because of the things they've said that have been so disproven over time, do not deserve our respect. They deserve our scrutiny. And then two, like just whether it's relying back on this is just what I believe or this is my testimony, I don't think it's a healthy way to operate. I think things should be scrutinized and not just say that like the entire system has so much mythicalness to it. We can just keep adding to it. No, I'm not saying you can't question it because it has magical qualities. What I'm saying, though, in that specific question is, does it matter if the plates, if the hill Cumorah he got the plates from is not the same hill Cumorah that the battle happened? No, that doesn't really matter because the Joseph Smith's own description of how the plates themselves operate are coming from a magical framework. If you were to say, well, why did Parley P. Pratt steal a man's wife? And you go, well, God flooded the world. Okay, that is not a fair answer. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying within the actual question you were asking, because I can't respond to the whole, okay, so sometimes people in the ex-Mormon world do this thing where they ask a question, but it's really just you're opening a door to a million questions of here's why I don't think it's true, which is fine to do that, but I can only answer one question at a time, right? So like I can't go in and say, well, the plates, it's fine for the plates to do that, and also the prophets have never said anything wrong. Like I'm not that like you're combining all those things into one thought. Well, let me before you go on, let me respond. Dan Vogel brings up Quake is committing the fallacy of possible proof. If miracles are claimed, then that answers every criticism. And so it's not just me. I'm saying, I'm talking about the paradigm.
Well, then he's wrong, though.
What?
I'm not saying it answers every criticism. I'm saying I don't care about that criticism. Like me.
Okay. All right. Well, I can't tell you what to care about, I guess. Okay, go on.
I don't know what's
okay. So maybe we can move on to another aspect. The Hill Cumorah is one. It feels like to me it is an evidence of 1,000 different things where Joseph Smith didn't know that he would be fact checked on something. And so I know you're pointing to the plates, for instance, and we can think of obviously the book of Abraham, and I know the apologetics on that one. I'm just saying from my perspective, it is a systemic pattern over and over again of Joseph.
Well, I will say
not knowing
from
that
my
he
recollection,
would be fact checked.
From my recollection, Joseph used the word Cumorah. What we know, glad tidings from Cumorah. I would love for someone to send me the quote where he says, "The hill I went to was the Hill Cumorah of the battle in the Book of Mormon." I haven't seen that quote. If that quote exists, I'm sure someone's going to comment it right now, but I haven't seen it.
All right, we'll have to see.
And so if Cumorah is then being transliterated to mean, the greetings of the restored gospel, which is totally fine to do, how Israel is a country and Israel is a people. If it's something like that, well, then suddenly we're misinterpreting Joseph Smith to ridicule him, But I would have to see the quote.
But I'm saying, so remember when we were talking like 7 hours ago about how I need to see the quote, and I'm like, but so much, it doesn't even matter if the quote is there or not. We can see by the entire pattern of the policies and the way that something was lived out. So do you not believe that Joseph Smith believed that the Lamanites were the Native Americans and that the Book of Mormon took place?
Well, America's half the world. America's massive.
But no, in the places that these frontier communities were settling in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Vermont and New York. Joseph Smith believed that that's where the Book of Mormon took place. Do you not believe that that's what he believed? Or because I'm saying it doesn't even need to be a quote about Hill Cumorah. I'm like, that's what he believed. He sent missionaries to go convert the Lamanites. He said he went over to the Zelf, you remember the thing with the bone? Yeah. He's like, these are Book of Mormon battles took place here.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if I don't know, I'm not going to go make a statement where I think the Book of Mormon took place. I have my own theory, but I'm not going to say it because I don't want to get into that world. But there is no Book of Joseph in the Book of Mormon. The scriptures Joseph Smith gave us are of ancient people, or he's channeling the Lord. His opinion on some of those things kind of may be as good as anybody else's. Why does the Book of Mormon, which purports to be an ancient text, not written by Joseph Smith, why do I have to believe, or why do I have to affirm a hypothesis of where he thinks it took place? Unless he's saying, "Thus saith the Lord told me Zarahemla was in Cedar Rapids." Okay, that doesn't exist. Just because a mystic has an opinion about the information of this channel that didn't even come from him doesn't mean I now must agree with every opinion of that mystic. I don't think that at all. If he was saying this Book of Mormon everything took place between the Mississippi River and wherever, and this is what Jesus Christ told me, and this area right here is the promised land, we go, oh, well, interesting idea. We're going to have to dissect that, because that starts to make us question. But if it isn't that, and he's just saying, I believe this is where this happened, well, that's totally fine. Because again, we can separate the divine information being given to someone from that person's later perspective. Joseph Smith barely even used the Book of Mormon in his sermons, which is interesting. He rarely even quoted it. He mostly quoted the Old Testament, right? So Joseph Smith gave us the Book of Mormon, and in contrast to all of his sermons and lectures, he barely even touched it in his actual preaching. I liken it to Helen Schuckman with A Course in Miracles. She channels that whole book and doesn't even want to copyright it, doesn't want to make money from it, doesn't want anything to do with it. If Helen Schuckman has something wrong with her in her she puts an idea forward in one of her essays as a psychology professor, and it contradicts A Course in Miracles. I'm not going to go, well, the whole thing is fake. I'm going to go, okay, she was the vessel, but the vessel does not have to be 100% right as long as the product and the implications of the product are something that's really worth examining. So that's why I think in the same way we have to disconnect the LDS Church from Mormonism, we have to also disconnect Joseph Smith from the Book of Mormon, because if it is what he's claiming it to be, we have to detach him. Because if he's claiming, I didn't write this came from someone else, we can't just view it only through his eyes because he's not the author.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into more of the validity of the Book of Mormon and I guess what is in it. The argument goes, obviously, that there is a lot of 19th century material in the Book of Mormon. Richard Bushman and various church historians will say that, it's obviously got a lot of things from Joseph Smith's day and his milieu that have been remixed and put into this text. Various things from the King James version of the Bible that still have things that have been mistranslated from the King James Bible that are put into the Book of Mormon. And so with the various different ways that we've been taught, I would say, you can disagree with this, of things being taught one way throughout church history about how Joseph Smith revealed translated the Book of Mormon by running his fingers over the golden plates and then, dictating what that would be from Reformed Egyptian into English for his scribes to write down. And then obviously the more modern take of what we're understanding now about what the actual people in the room have been saying about the rock in the hat and those revelations and the argument between a loose translation of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith being able to take ideas that he had and put it into the text of the Book of Mormon versus a tight translation of exactly what was either revealed on the plates or on the stone. So where do you come down on how loose versus tight translation and how we have, so many things that would make Richard Bushman and others say that this has 19th century material in it?
Who cares what they think?
Do you think that it has 19th century material in it? Or do you think that it is, yes, ancient, since you say, yes, these things actually took place, that it's written by ancient prophets and it is the words of them put into the book that we have today?
I think both can be true. I think it's ancient, but I do think when you're translating it for the purposes of raising someone's to a higher spirituality, you can liken certain things to be in a way we can understand it. I think it's totally fine. I think God would probably do that. That seems something he would definitely want to do. I mean, I don't see why not. I don't see why the parameters of channeling channeling spiritual records that are stored in heaven have to be, they can't have a flair that helps us understand it to our own perspective. I don't see why those rules would exist.
Yeah, I know a lot of your opinions on this, so I'll kind of, since we're approaching 3 hours, we can start to kind of wrap up. But I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, because I know a lot of your opinions around, the Book of Mormon, and one of my favorite videos I've ever made was responding to Word Radio when you guys had Hannah Stoddard on. And so what I found was so interesting is because I think you were pushing back quite a bit on the traditionalist view that Rod Meldrum, again, this traditionalist faction that's still mainstream LDS, that have on the Book of Mormon. They would say that Joseph Smith did not use a rock and a hat. Absolutely not. That is a satanic device. And Hannah Stoddard said in that interview you did with her about how, Joseph Smith, there's no way he is a prophet if he used those things. Those are, mechanisms of the occult. And I feel like you pushed back quite a bit on that. And but the interesting thing is the Word Radio comment section was can't wait to have Hannah Stoddard back on. And I feel like the comment section was 99% of the Word Radio viewers really rejecting anything to do with rock and a hat, which is now what is in the Gospel Topics essays and what the church tells people is the method of translation. So where do you come down on that? Was a rock and a hat used? I know you're it doesn't matter if I care, but do you believe that was the method? And how do you respond to people in the traditionalist faction who would say that it's satanic?
Oh, okay. Well, first I want to say, just for the record, I don't know Hannah that well. I've only talked with her through the show. I know
everything she believes.
Okay.
I honestly have a track inside her mind. I've read everything she's ever done and watched everything. I love I love the traditionalist faction. I wish I could talk about it constantly. So continue. Okay. I could probably answer a question if you had a question about her. But
well, anyway, I know Rod personally. I love Rod Meldrum. I think he's a phenomenal guy. Really, really kind, Christ-like person. So I like all these people. I really do. I think, he used the divining stone for sure. I think if you, I'm going to use this word, people will get mad, but whatever. A lot of psychics and people involved in sort of that metaphysical, energy, dimensional, that whole work, oftentimes will have a certain object they use that like opens a key for the channeling, so yeah, I think it's totally fine. But this also, and I don't want to get into this a whole other tangent, but I have a thing I'm going to be presenting on pretty soon about how, if you're approaching the translation perspective from there is no God, well then yeah, it's nonsense. But if you're approaching from the perspective of, there is a God and God is in charge of this world, God is in charge of the light spectrum, then that kind of changes everything. I mean, human beings, right? We can only see 0.005% of what's actually in front of us on the light spectrum. That's that 0.005% of visible light is all we can see. We can't even see 1% of what's actually here. And if this spectrum of light is actually being controlled by God or the gods, then it's pretty easy that they could transfigure someone to see 2 or 3% to be able to perform these kinds of miracles, right? So I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with there being a seer stone or a divining stone, whatever you want to call it. I think there's a lot more magic to this world. We now live in a time in which we know that there are frequencies, that thoughts create frequencies and thoughts create realities. We know that we live in a magical world, and that pure, materialist, atheistic perspective that people want to view the translation of the Book of Mormon through. Well, of course, you're going to come to the conclusion that it's bunk. But if you accept that we do have a world of miracles, and some of these things we can't explain are. I'm just listening to your kids sing.
Yeah, you can close the door, probably. I think so.
I think it's totally fine. I think it actually makes sense. I think under the idea of God operating, changing the visible light spectrum completely makes the idea of the seer stones make a lot of sense. And Joseph Smith used these objects as a way to ignite that divine translation, to ignite that divine connection that would allow him to tap into the all mind where we get the Book of Mormon from.
All right, here's my snarky ex-Mormon reply. As my friend, I can't find, Chris Murphy asked, this is our snarky ex-Mormon reply to that. Then why did God make Joseph, why didn't God just make Joseph able to read the plates? And then he also had another comment. Sorry, that wasn't the one I exactly wanted to show. But it was basically about, here's my snarky ex-Mormon reply to that, Kwaku, is, I get you, except for what is, errors from the King James Bible doing in the Book of Mormon? I know you...
Don't make me go into apologist mode. Don't do it!
But the thing, just one sentence answer, because I understand what you're saying, but when push comes to shove, I do...
They're not errors. When I read that one book... That one PDF, when I read it and he said it was errors and I said, where are the errors? And it just linked back to a chart he made where he said they were errors. That doesn't count as an error.
Let's put it this way.
That's not make it an error.
Let's put it this way. What about how, for instance, in the Book of Mormon, it is said that it comes from the brass plates that are taken. And we know that Deuteronomy, Isaiah, that what we have in the King James Bible wasn't even written until long after Lehi left Jerusalem and would not have access to those writings. That the writings that are in the Book of Mormon are...
Okay. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
I know exactly where you're going.
Give me your apologetics on Deuteronomy, Isaiah. Why are things in the Book of Mormon that were supposed to be written at this time period from these plates that were not
You're
were
gonna
not
hate my answer.
written
You're gonna
until much
hate,
longer.
You're gonna hate my answer.
And remember, the whole reason I'm asking this is because we're talking about what you just said about such an expansive view. But I'm like, when push comes to shove, why are these things in there?
You're absolutely detest my answer.
Do it.
That argument is 100% relying upon scholars and archaeologists who already admit they don't know things until they can find a source of them. In the same way we didn't know about the Guatemala lowlands, the Maya lowlands in ancient Guatemala, we didn't know there was a city the size of Chicago underground until 30, 40 years ago. It's the same argument. It's well, we haven't found this yet. We haven't found evidence of these Isaiah writings, that Lehi would have had access to. That means it's fake. It's like, how many times are we going to rely upon nameless scholars that are telling us a version of world history that we already disagree with 50% of them on anyway? Like, I literally do not get why I can look at the things the Book of Mormon gets right and the miracles it brings forth and the implications of how it could absolutely revolutionize society and change our spirits and throw it away because, well, the Deutero-Isaiah controversy. Like, who cares what these guys haven't found? I do hate it. You're right.
Okay.
They haven't, but
here,
like,
all right, continue.
There were no lion. Well, there couldn't have been lions in Israel because, until we found the lion bones. Like, literally, why do we put so much stake into what they haven't found yet? Like, I'm supposed to revolutionize my whole spiritual connection and belief in this book because of some nameless scholars who haven't found a thing yet? Like, who cares?
Here,
why am I supposed to? Don't follow the prophet. Follow the leader of consciousness until there's a PhD next to the name, and then it's bow down to them. Like, it blows my mind because I would think ex-Mormons, well, I guess not all ex-Mormons, but ex-Mormons in the space would just be as critical as anyone claiming to have authority on a subject, and especially a subject as mysterious as world history and archaeology. We can't prove most things. Like, we have no clue why Plato went for freaking 50 pages long of dialogue on lost cities and civilizations we can't prove, but referencing them as if they were real, as if they're historical realities. Do we just go, nonsense? No, we freaking study Plato and we say, let's look at this and let's give it more than 200 years, than to just say, it's a bunch of, it's nonsense. I don't get it. I don't get it.
All right, we're going to wrap up and I want some quick yes or no. It's because I'm the new